You know how passionate I am about sitting down with deep experts, people who can broaden and open my mind and yours, people that can teach me things that I've never thought about and that I can share with you as well. And today's guest will definitely not disappoint. He's a clinical neuroscientist, a professor, a psychotherapist, and he's a 10 times New York Times best-selling author. His name is Dr. Daniel G. Amen, and today we're talking about his new book, Feel Better Fast and Make It Last, Unlocking Your Brain's Healing Potential to Overcome Negativity, Anxiety, Anger, Stress, and Trauma. So if you like the sound of what we're discussing today, make sure you go out onto Amazon, go out to Barnes & Noble, and grab the book. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Jay, it's just such a pleasure.
No, the pleasure's all mine. I was saying to you just briefly when we were speaking before that this is what I crave in life, is to sit down with someone who has dedicated their life and work and their purpose to such a deep and noble cause. And to be able to sit with you is a complete honor for me. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, this book, when I was diving into it and the conversation we've just had, I instantly had so many questions because for me, the brain's the most important thing for us to talk about right now, especially right now. And that's the question I wanted to start with you with is, why did you choose the brain throughout all your work as being such a big area of focus?
Well, it runs everything. But when I went to medical school, I wanted to be a pediatrician because I adore children. And when I was a second-year medical student, I had just gotten married, and my wife tried to kill herself, and I was horrified, and I was traumatized. And I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist, and I came to realize if he helped her, which he did, it wouldn't just help her, that it would help me, it would help our children, it would help our grandchildren. And so nearly 40 years ago, I decided to be a psychiatrist, and I have loved it every single day. But I joined the only medical profession that never looks at the organ it treats. And before I went to medical school, I was in the Army. I was an infantry medic, and I got myself retrained as an X-ray technician and developed a passion for imaging. And our professors used to always say, how do you know unless you look? How do you know unless you look? And now I'm a psychiatrist, and we're not looking. And I'm an agitator. My father, growing up, he called me a maverick, and to him that was not a good thing. But I got it from him. His favorite words growing up, when I was growing up, the first favorite word was bullshit, and the second, his favorite word was no. Everything was bullshit or no. So obviously I got it from him. And I loved being a psychiatrist, but I'm like, well, why don't we look at the brain? And because obviously the brain is our organ. The brain, is involved in how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you get along with other people. It's the organ of intelligence, creativity, and every single decision you make. And with my X-ray background, I'm like, we should look. And so in the late 1980s, I started looking at the brain with a study called quantitative EEG. And it was fascinating that I could see underlying patterns for things like depression and ADHD and autism. But in 1991, I went to a lecture on brain SPECT imaging. SPECT is a nuclear medicine study that looks at blood flow and activity, and it rocked my world. Let me take a little detour.
Please.
So how do addictions start? Let's take gambling addiction. Addictions start with a big win, right? Either cocaine, you're like, whoa, I've never felt like that before. I want to feel like that again. Or with gambling, you win the whole jackpot and dopamine floods the pleasure centers of your brain. And you're like, oh, whoa, I want that again. Well, I'd been a psychiatrist for nearly 10 years when I ordered my first SPECT scan. My first 10 cases were big wins because I went into this profession to get people well, because I knew the pain of when you're not well, from a suicide attempt from my first wife, and then the level of emotional and personal pain that brought to me.
Of course.
And so as patients got better, because I had more information. I'm like, I have to do this again. Well, today we have 150,000 scans that we've done on patients from 120 countries. So I'm completely addicted. Because, if you don't look, you don't know. And we need to stop lying about that. But wholesale across the US, really across the world, you'll go to your doctor, you say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I can't sleep, I have temper problems, I'm obsessiveness. And within a 20-minute office visit, you leave with prescriptions for anxiety, depression, sleep, and that's insane. When no one has looked at your brain, so you don't know, does it work too hard or not hard enough? Is it toxic from drug abuse or from mold in your home? Or is it traumatic because you played a contact sport and it damaged your frontal lobes? And so I have been on this crusade, really, to change psychiatry, because we should act like our other medical colleagues and look at what we do before we do it. But along the way, I learned big lessons, like first do no harm, that some of our medications are actually not that great for you, that they're natural ways to heal the brain. And oh, by the way, you got to get your heart right. You got to get your gut right. You got to get your kidneys right. You got to get your liver right in order for your brain to be right, because when your brain works right, you work right.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it was actually fascinating. Just earlier this week, I was speaking to Naveen Jain on the podcast as well. And I don't know if you've come across Naveen, etc. I should definitely connect you both. He feels very closely with the way you do around having a crusade around modern medicine and what's supplied and how it's just prescribed to anyone and everyone without actually knowing anyone's gut, brain, or any other health. So I should definitely connect you. You've just sparked an idea. But I want to ask you, before we dive into, and I know everyone listening and watching, you're probably thinking like I am, oh my God, we cannot wait for this because you can give us so many practical tips. But before we do that, I want to ask you more of a conscious question around what is the difference between the brain and the mind? And what are the mistakes we make when talking about the mind versus understanding the brain?
The mind comes from the brain. If your brain is damaged, it damages your mind. And without a brain, you don't have a mind. Now, you can train the brain so that you have a healthier mind, but let me just tell you a story, since I know that's what you love is stories.
Absolutely.
Storytelling. There was this couple that were in marital therapy, and they went for 3 years, spent about $20,000, and at the end, the therapist flunked them, told them to get divorced. And they were very unhappy that they had failed. And so they got mad at the therapist, and the therapist said, well, I know a doctor in Costa Mesa, California, that takes care of really difficult people. You should go see him. And, as part of our process, we scan people. We do SPECT. And the wife had a pretty healthy brain. The husband had a moth-eaten brain. It was really low in activity. It's a pattern we usually see with alcoholism or drug abuse. But in his history, he said he never used drugs and he didn't drink. Now, the first thing you learn about drug addicts is they lie. So in front of his wife, I'm like, well, is that true? You don't drink and you've never done drugs. And he said, Dr. Amen, that's not my problem. I've never drank and I've never done drugs. And then I looked to his wife and I said, is he telling me the truth? And she said, oh, yes, Dr. Amen, he doesn't drink. As far as I know, he's never done drugs. He's just an asshole. And I started laughing.
Can you imagine that?
But in my head, I'm like, why does his brain look so bad? And so I thought about, well, what are the different options? Drugs, alcohol? Well, probably not if your wife who doesn't like you says no. An environmental toxin, anoxia, lack of oxygen, an infection, severe anemia or hormone disruptions. And so my next question to him is, where do you work? He said, I work in a furniture factory. I said, what do you do? He said, I finish furniture all day long. He was doing drugs. He was doing the worst drug of abuse, which is inhaling organic solvents. And I'm like, do you wear a mask? He said, no, they tell me I should. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't say it because I have good frontal lobe function. I'm thinking that is not the sign of intelligent life. I'm like, is there ventilation? He said, often not. It's hot. I'm sweaty. And I looked to his wife and I said, so when did he become an asshole? And she said, what do you mean? I said, did you marry him that way? Do you have father issues you're trying to work out? And she said, no. When we dated and for the first 3 years, he was great. It was about 5 years ago. And then the light went on in her head. About the time he got this job, his behavior started to change. Do you think it could be related? Of course it could be related. And I love this shift. That's what the scans do. They shift from he's an asshole. And actually, his therapist gave him that same diagnosis. Now, you can't write asshole in the chart.
Absolutely.
So what you write is mixed personality disorder with narcissistic and antisocial features. What's that? You're an asshole, right? It's not a billing code, right? And that shift was so important because play this out with me. He's angry. He's depressed. He's mad and he's sad. If they did what the therapist recommended, which was get divorced, now it's going to be like his skin is being ripped off
scales.
because this is the love of his life. He just can't act in a consistent way. What is the organ of acting? It's your brain, right? And his brain is damaged. And so if they would have gotten divorced, he very well could have killed himself. And as many people do, he also could have killed his wife and his children, right? So this is the consequence of not looking. But once we looked, she shifted and she's like, do you mean in his attempt to be a good husband, going to work, supporting the family, that he's being poisoned and that he's sick and he's not bad? Exactly. And so we took him out of work, worked on rehabilitating his brain, which is one of my favorite things to do, is taking bad brains and making them better. And years later, they're still married. They love each other. He's much better. And she's not as stressed because when you live with someone whose brain is damaged, you become damaged as well.
Absolutely. Wow, that's incredible. So I guess my follow-up question to that is, how many of us are living with someone who has a damaged brain? How many of us, me sitting right here, like how many of us have a brain that is somewhat damaged, and what are the mistakes we make when we're trying to heal that in our everyday life?
And the first mistake we make is we don't care about it, that we don't love it. So when I started doing SPECT in 1991, I scanned everybody I knew. I scanned my sisters, I have 5 of them, pray for me.
I want you to scan me one day.
I want to.
Yeah, I'd love that.
I scanned my mom, and she had, at 60, a perfect brain. In fact, she was our resident model of a perfect brain. And
she must have loved that.
It fit the story of her life. Right. Even at 87, she has 48 grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She knows everybody's birthday. She's everybody's best friend. She's just a phenomenal human being. And then I scanned my brain, and I didn't like it because I played football in high school, and I had meningitis when I was a young soldier. And that just really pissed me off, that my 60-year-old mother had a better-looking brain than I did. And so I developed a concept then called brain envy. I wanted a better brain. I wanted a brain that looked like hers. And, as a psychiatrist, or as a trained psychiatrist, you have to, of course, read Freud. And he had this concept of penis envy. And
absolutely,
in 40 years, I've not seen one case. The only time I've seen a case of it is when I was on Broadway a few weeks ago. And at intermission, I saw the long line at the women's bathroom and no line at the men's. And I go, penis envy, there it is right there. But, it's really the only organ where size matters is your brain. It's the 3 pounds of fat between your ears. So the first thing you have to do if you want a better life is you have to start wanting a better brain. And that is critical because that leads, I know you want, for your listeners and viewers, tips. We call them tiny habits. We work with the Stanford Persuasive Tech Lab on how people change. And they make small incremental changes that can make huge differences over time. So the first tiny habit we'll talk about, and I actually think this is the most important one, it's whatever you do, whatever you say, whatever you eat, whatever you do, it takes 3 seconds. You just ask yourself, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that question with intelligence and love, because you do the right thing not because you should, but because you love yourself. Ultimately, doing the right thing is the ultimate act of love. It just works. Is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if it's bad for it, I don't do it if I care about myself.
You've ruined chocolate for me forever now.
No, chocolate's great for your brain.
It is, yeah.
And we actually make sugar-free, dairy-free chocolate.
Some
and
vegan,
we make
so
a
that fits.
chocolate coconut bar. And they're phenomenal. And what they really are because that's not our primary business, it's a metaphor for there is no suffering in getting well. Plus, I am named after my grandfather, who was a candy maker. I mean, that was his job.
Wow.
But he died early because he was also fat and had heart disease.
Wow.
And I'm not fat and I don't have heart disease because I know it's a risk for me. And I don't give in to the behavior making it likely to be so. But you don't have to give up chocolate. In fact, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm very much a creature of habit. And
me too.
So, I have maybe 30 foods I eat.
Yeah.
And I only want them to love me back. So I only want to be in love with someone or something that loves me back.
Isn't that all of us?
So I don't know if you've ever been in a bad relationship.
I have.
I mean, I
yes.
got to meet your beautiful wife, and one day I hope you meet mine, and I adore her. But I've been in bad relationships.
Me too.
And I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not. And I'm damn sure not doing it with food.
Yeah.
That's too often people say, I love bread, or I love pasta, I love brownies, in fact, I had one woman, we should talk about the Daniel Plan at some point. It's this massive program I did at Saddleback Church. Now thousands of churches around the world do it. And one of the pastor's wives, after she heard me talk, she said, after I heard you, I told my husband I'd rather get Alzheimer's disease than give up sugar.
Wow.
And I'm like, did you date the bad boys in high school? Because that's like a seriously bad relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
That's terrible, yeah. So let's start talking about that kind of rehabilitation process. And in the book, you obviously have your incredible acronym. And I picked out some of the letters that I wanted to focus in on. And one of my big ones is when you talk about the rational mind. Now, I know that we are prone to making irrational decisions and choices all the time. We do it every single day, as far as I know, and as far as my reading has gone. And I wonder why we do that, why we constantly choose to make irrational decisions, and how we start to overcome that.
So in the book, there's this cool mnemonic, Brain Excel. And it starts by getting your brain right, because your rational mind is better when you do that. And the rational mind is really about training your brain and training your mind to help you rather than hurt you. So often people are just brutalized by the thoughts that go through their heads. And many years ago, at a really hard day at work, I had seen 4 suicidal patients, and that's hard because you feel responsible for them, but you actually don't have full responsibility. I saw 2 couples who hated each other. I saw 2 teenagers who had run away from home. And at the end of the day, I'm feeling pretty stressed. And I walked into my house, and my wife and kids were gone, but there was an ant infestation in my house, in my kitchen, and I'm furious. And as I'm wiping up what felt like thousands of ants, when you go to medical school, you have to learn 50,000 new terms your first year. And so you get good at coming up with acronyms and mnemonics. And so I'm always playing with words.
Yeah.
And as I'm wiping up the ants, I'm thinking, automatic negative thoughts. My patients are infested with ants. And I need to teach them to eradicate the ants. And so the next day at work, I brought a can of ant spray and I put it on the coffee table. And I'm like, I'm going to show you how to get rid of the ants. And over time, that morphed into an anteater and an ant puppet, because I also see children. And I taught them how to do it. And it's one of the most important things that I teach anybody how to do. You don't have to believe every stupid thing you think. And if you can learn to tell yourself the truth, because this is not positive thinking. I am not a fan of positive thinking.
I agree.
Positive thinking means, I can go a couple of blocks to Jack in the Box and get 4 of their big desserts, and it won't have a negative impact on my life.
And it will.
Or positive thinking is I can, fool around on my phone until 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's not going to have a negative impact on me the next day. People who have low level of anxiety go to jail, and they die early. There's actually a cool longevity study out of Stanford where they looked at 1,548 10-year-old children in 1921, and then researchers followed them for 90 years, looking at what goes with health, success, and longevity. And the don't worry, be happy people died the earliest from accidents and preventable illnesses. The people who live the longest, they're conscientious. They told themselves the truth. I have taxes to pay. I better pay them or I'm going to be in trouble. Or I said I'm going to show up at 2 o'clock. I show up at 2 o'clock. So it's conscientiousness, which is really a prefrontal cortex function, right? So you have to have your brain right. But here's the tiny habit. Whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then ask yourself, is it true? So those are these 3 little words I love. And I have a process that I talk about in the book. So a bad thought, like, today is going to be hard. Is that true? Well, I don't know. And then the second question is that absolutely true? No. How do I feel when I believe the thought? Awful. Who would I be without the thought? Free. Take the original thought, turn it to its opposite. And what you find, the opposite of what's torturing you is usually true. So it just blows your mind. But if you can learn to be disciplined about questioning your own thoughts, and I got this technique from my friend Byron Katie. She wrote a brilliant book called Loving What Is.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. It's sort of a combination of cognitive therapy and Buddhism. And I love it. Whenever I'm off or I'm sad or I'm stressed, I'll read portions of Loving What Is or listening to it because she read it and she has a beautiful voice. And it's training your mind to help you rather than hurt you. Another rational mind technique is start every day with today is going to be a great day. Why? Because your unconscious mind will find why it's going to be a great day. We are programmed through our evolutionary biology to wake up in fear because our ancestors woke up and the fear was real. Something was going to eat them. Something wanted to hurt them. And so you wake up anxious, but now that's not true for most of us. And if you start with today is going to be a great day, your unconscious mind then begins to find, well, why is it going to be a great day? And for families, it's a great ritual. Hey, honey, today's going to be a great day. And then you begin in your mind to find why it's going to be a great day. It's so easy to find why it's going to be a bad day. At the end of the day, I actually do this as a ritual both at dinner and then when I put myself to sleep, is what went well today. And we focus on what went well. Now, we also want to focus on, well, what can I learn from today? What could I have done better? Because we're always striving to grow. But when I put myself to sleep at night, I'll say a prayer, and then I'll just go back through my day, what went well, because it actually sets my dreams up to be more positive than negative. Because dreams, there's a purpose for them. It's really we're consolidating memories from what happened that day. And sometimes, because you didn't consolidate them from the past, they get infected by negativity. So super simple, tiny habits that can make a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great tiny habit. I think building that, and this is what we find so often, even in the work that I do, that people don't have a conversation with themselves that is conscious. They have an unconscious or subconscious conversation with themselves, which is naturally taking down that negative rabbit hole or living out the pattern that they've built up for so many years or decades or whatever it may be. But I don't know how many people are having a conscious, intentional conversation with themselves to dive deeper into a thought, a belief, a pattern.
And they've never